Staying informed, it can really feel like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes, can it?
Totally. So much information flying around.
Exactly. You want to know what's going on, but, without getting completely overwhelmed by every single detail.
Right.
And that's what we try to do here. We take a specific set of sources, a deep dive, and pull out what really matters.
Basically, your shortcut to understanding the important stuff. We do the sifting, so you get the key developments, what they might mean, quickly.
So today, our source is the latest issue of the Observer Group newspapers of Southern California.
Yeah.
This one's dated May 21st, 2025.
And it covers a lot of ground. You've got the state budget, some employment numbers, a local celebration here in LA, things happening in Congress, even college sports, a real mix.
Yeah, quite the snapshot. So our aim is to, pull out the most significant, maybe the most interesting bits from these stories, give you a clear picture of what's shaping SoCal and, well, beyond.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with the big one. The California state budget. It affects pretty much everyone here. Governor Newsom just put out his revised proposal for 2025-26. It's massive, $321.9 billion.
Huge number. And the main thing it's wrestling with is a projected deficit, $11.9 billion.
Right. So how does the governor propose to fill that gap? It's not small.
Well, it's sort of a combination strategy. He's talking about around $5 billion in spending cuts,
Okay.
then another $5.3 billion through borrowing and, moving money between funds,
For his rate.
and then about $1.7 billion in what they call fund shifts. Importantly, though, no new state taxes are being proposed right now.
That's significant.
Yeah.
And they expect to keep reserves.
Yeah, they're projecting about $15.7 billion in reserves will remain. So there's still a cushion, but they are dipping into things.
And Newsom, he framed this whole thing economically, right? He mentioned California's size. He did. He emphasized, California being the world's fourth largest economy,
Yeah.
$4.1 trillion annual output. Big number.
There's always a but. But he also called the current economic uncertain and volatile. And he pointed a finger at federal policy, called it the Trump slump.
Hmm. So blaming external factors for the downturn, that sets the stage for some tough decisions, I imagine.
Exactly. And some of those decisions involve Medi-Cal. That's California's Medicaid program, covers over 14 million people, many of them low income, a lot of Black residents included.
Okay, this is where it gets really critical for people. What are the proposed changes to Medi-Cal?
They're pretty significant. First, a freeze on new enrollment for undocumented adults starting in 2026.
A freeze. Right.
Also, introducing a $100 monthly premium for that same group.
Wow, okay, a premium.
And eliminating long-term care and dental services for undocumented folks. Plus, they're looking at bringing back asset tests for seniors.
What's that test? So?
And reducing hours for in-home supportive services caregivers, IHSS. And that's a workforce, it's important to remember, where Black women make up a really large percentage.
So these aren't just abstract numbers. These changes could hit vulnerable groups and specific communities really hard.
Definitely. It raises that tough question, balancing the budget versus maintaining the safety net. The budget director, Joe Stevenshaw, pointed out that medical costs are rising faster than state revenues, but these specific cuts, well, they could really strain emergency rooms, affect public health overall.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. But it's not all cuts in the health area, is it? I saw something about behavioral health.
Right. That's an area where they are proposing continued investment. Funding is staying for Proposition 1. That's the initiative focused on expanding mental health and substance use treatment, including housing.
Prop 1, okay.
And they're launching something called BH Connect. It's a new initiative meant to better coordinate behavioral health care for medical members who have the highest needs.
So even with the deficit, mental health remains a priority.
It seems so, particularly for people experiencing homelessness or involved with the justice system. That focus seems pretty clear in this budget revision.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about K-12 schools? Always a huge part of the budget.
Yeah, and the news here is generally more positive. The revised budget keeps funding pretty strong. They're proposing $25,176 in total per student funding.
That sounds like a lot. Where does it come from?
A big chunk, $18,671, is from Proposition 98. That's the part of the Constitution that guarantees a certain amount of the state budget for schools.
Right, Prop 98.
And there's a cost of living adjustment, 2.3%, for the local control funding formula, the LCFF.
And the LCFF, that's the one that sends more money to districts with more high-need students, like Black students, English learners, low-income kids.
Exactly. It's designed for equity. Plus, they're keeping funding for things like universal transitional kindergarten, free school meals, after-school and summer programs.
And new stuff for reading.
Yeah, new funding proposed for evidence-based reading instruction, literacy coaches, teacher training. People like Marshall Tuck from EdVoice and State Superintendent Tony Thurmond seem pretty positive about that.
What about a higher education? The UC and CSU systems. I heard there were big cuts looming there.
They were initially looking at potentially larger cuts, like 8%, but this revision brings it down to 3%.
So some relief for them.
Seems so. UC President Michael Drake sounded appreciative, mentioned Newsom's commitment to students.
But is everyone happy with the K-12 funding picture?
Not entirely. The California School Boards Association, CSBA, they're raising red flags. They're worried about the state deferring $1.3 billion in Prop 98 funding, pushing payments down the road.
Deferring, so paying later.
Exactly. And the CSBA president, Dr. Betty Lusk, called it unconstitutional Prop 98 manipulation. So while higher ed cuts were reduced, there are concerns about the long-term stability for K-12 funding because of these deferrals.
Okay, let's talk about homelessness, another massive issue. What's the budget doing there?
Well, it's holding funding steady, so maintaining current levels, but no new major allocations.
No new money. And Newsom sounded frustrated.
Yeah, expressed frustration with how local governments are tackling the issue, though he did note California's homelessness rate didn't jump as much as the national average last year.
Still, it's a huge crisis, especially, as the article notes, for Black Californians. Over 30% of the unhoused population, but only about 6.5% of the state's population.
That disparity is stark. It really points to deeper systemic issues. The budget mentions developing a new state housing and homelessness agency, maybe a future infrastructure bond, but significant new funding seems unlikely before 2027.
So not much immediate help in this budget revision for that specific crisis.
Not in terms of new large-scale funding, no.
And what about the California Legislative Black Caucus's proposals? The Road to Repair package related to reparations.
Right. That package includes things like setting up a state reparations agency, a guaranteed income pilot, investments in housing, education, health for descendants of enslaved Black Americans. This revised budget doesn't have specific line items funding those big proposals.
No specific funding. So is the idea dead?
Not necessarily. It's complex. While Newsom has previously said he supports exploring reparations, the money isn't allocated here for those specific new initiatives. But there is $12 million set aside to implement reparations-related bills that were already signed into law.
Okay. So funding for existing laws, but
Yeah.
not the new big stuff yet.
Exactly. And the article mentions negotiations are ongoing through what they call budget trailer bills. So things could still change. The conversation is definitely still happening.
Got it. And all this state budget stuff is happening while there's talk of federal cuts?
Yeah, that's the context hanging over everything. Potential federal cuts to Medicaid, food assistance, housing programs, that could put even more pressure on California, especially Medi-Cal.
So, unsurprisingly, state leaders are divided on Newsom's plan.
Oh, yeah. Big split. Senate President pro tem Mike McGuire, a Democrat, voiced support, but Assembly Republican leader James Gallagher came out strongly against it, blaming reckless spending and failed leadership for the deficit.
Classic Sacramento debate. Different views on spending and priorities.
Absolutely, and that debate will shape the final budget deal.
Okay, let's shift focus now. The Observer also reported on some pretty concerning employment data, particularly for Black women.
Yeah, this was national data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for April. It showed Black women saw the steepest job loss, shedding about 106,000 jobs.
106,000. That's huge, especially when the overall economy.
The overall U.S. economy actually added 177,000 jobs in April, and the national unemployment rate basically held steady at 4.2%.
So a major divergence there.
A big one. The number of employed Black women dropped quite a bit from March to April, and their unemployment rate jumped from 5.1% to 6.1%. That was the largest month-to-month increase for any racial or gender group.
And this wasn't just people leaving the workforce.
No, their labor force participation rate only dipped slightly. Meanwhile, unemployment for white women stayed flat at 3.3%, Hispanic women also unchanged at 4.6%.
So it really singles out Black women facing specific headwinds in April.
It certainly suggests that. The article mentions the potential impact of facing, dual barriers, racial and gender discrimination in the job market.
What about Black workers overall?
Their overall unemployment rate also ticked up to 6.3%. That was the third month in a row it increased. Interestingly, though, Black men saw their unemployment rate actually go down a bit to 5.6%.
Complex picture. What about other groups?
Asian Americans had the lowest rate at 3.0%, white Americans at 3.8%. And HBCU Money pointed out it was a 5-month low for employed black women, 5-month high for unemployed black women.
So multiple sources highlighting this trend. Did anyone offer analysis on why?
Yeah, economist William Michael Cunningham from Creative Investment Research, he had some strong words. He noted the overall number of unemployed black Americans went up by 29,000 in April, close to 1.4 million total, and the total black labor force actually shrank slightly.
And his explanation.
He directly linked it to what he called the anti-DEI and anti-black focus of the new administration's policies. He expressed concern that traditional paths to stability for black women might be disappearing.
Wow. He specifically mentioned DEI
Mm-hmm.
and government jobs.
Yes. He pointed to the drop in federal government employment down 9,000 in April and the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion roles as factors. Those have historically been important employment sectors for black women.
So despite those specific losses, where was the job growth happening nationally?
Mostly in healthcare, transportation and warehousing, financial activity, social assistance, those sectors kept adding jobs. And average hourly earnings edged up a bit nationally.
Okay, so we'll need to watch the May numbers, which come out when?
Friday, June 6th. See if this worrying trend for black women continues or if it was a one-month anomaly.
Okay, let's pivot to something more positive happening right here in LA, the centennial celebration for Malcolm X.
Yes, a really significant commemoration for his 100th birthday, which would have been May 19th. Los Angeles really stepped up to honor his legacy.
And it was a collaboration.
It was between the City of Los Angeles and FAMLI, that's the Foundation for Arts, Mentorship, Leadership, and Innovation. They partnered on both the street dedication and the annual Malcolm X Legacy Festival.
Tell me about the street dedication. That sounds major.
It was. They unveiled signs at several spots to complete the 5-mile Malcolm X route along Crenshaw Boulevard.
5 miles along Crenshaw. Where exactly?
They had unveilings at Crenshaw and Obama Boulevard, Crenshaw and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard Councilwoman Heather Hutt and Assemblymember Said El-Awary were there for that one.
Right near the metro station there.
Exactly. And the final one was at Crenshaw and Florence. That officially completed the Malcolm X corridor, which people are calling the Shaw.
The Shaw, I like that. And the MLK unveiling had extra significance.
Yeah, it was right there at Freedom Square near the bust of Cesar Chavez, a nice symbolic linking of struggles for human rights. And apparently, people turned out even though it was kind of a gloomy, drizzly, May gray day.
Good to hear. And the focus was on.
On El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz as a human rights activist. It builds on a previous unveiling at Crenshaw and Vernon, so his name now joins other icons honored along that stretch. Rosa Parks, Obama, MLK, Nipsey Hussle.
That's powerful company.
Yeah.
And then there was the festival.
Yes, the 33rd Annual Malcolm X Legacy Festival at Leimert Plaza Park. The theme this year was Human Rights by Any Means Necessary.
Strong theme. What was the vibe like?
Sounds like it was vibrant. Opening remarks, Dwight Trivell sang Lift Every Voice and Sing, libations, lots of performances, spoken word artists like Larry Love and Professor X, musical tributes, even a fashion show.
A real community celebration. Did any officials stop by?
Congresswoman Maxine Waters visited and recognized FAMLI for their work. It really sounds like it brought people together to reflect on his legacy, but also celebrate Black culture today.
Were there awards given out?
Yes, they honored a young leader, Roman Combs, and gave Lifetime Achievement Awards to Sabir Majid and Masanga Mbele Andre Parvenu, recognizing ongoing contributions.
And the article mentioned new books about him, too.
Yeah, highlighting his continued relevance. Books by Ibram X. Kendi for young readers, the Paine biography, Manning Marable's work, Mark Whitaker's book on his afterlife. His story and ideas are clearly still being actively explored and debated.
It really underscores how his legacy continues to resonate, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A really fitting centennial tribute.
Okay, let's shift back to policy, this time at the federal level. The Observer covered Congressional Black Caucus members talking about health care cuts.
Right. 6 CBC members held a discussion about their efforts to fight back against proposed cuts, particularly to healthcare programs, and how they're messaging that fight.
Which members were involved?
Let's see. Chairwoman Yvette Clarke, Troy Carter, Sidney Kame-Langer-Dove, Robin Kelly, Jasmine Crockett, and Jennifer McClellan.
And this was happening just before a vote on Trump's budget plan.
Yeah, the day before House Republicans on the Budget Committee were supposed to vote on President Trump's plan. That vote actually failed initially because some Republicans wanted even deeper cuts. They were set to try again later.
Wow. deeper cuts. What were the CBC members saying specifically?
Well, Rep. McClellan, for example, argued the cuts were being made essentially to fund tax cuts elsewhere. She cited projections that the plan could strip health insurance from over 13 million people nationwide, including hundreds of thousands in her state of Virginia, and put huge pressure on state budgets.
And they were really focused on Medicaid. Why that program specifically, when other areas like education might also face cuts?
Rep. Crockett addressed that. She said healthcare is just a major, major focus right now. She even referenced the public reaction to the murder of that United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson.
Oh, right. That story.
Yeah, and she mentioned how data is available showing the impact of potential cuts district by district. So they see healthcare as a really potent issue politically right now.
It does feel like the healthcare battle has been raging since the ACA passed. Different sides, different philosophies.
Absolutely. It's kind of a fundamental disagreement. You have Republicans generally pushing towards privatization, market-based approaches, and Democrats focus on expanding coverage, often through programs like Medicaid. This is just the latest round in that ongoing fight.
A fight over, really, the role of government in healthcare.
Exactly. Is it a right, a privilege? How do we ensure access? These are the big questions underlying those budget debates.
Okay, let's wrap up with some exciting local sports news. UCLA softball.
Yes. Good news here. They're heading back to the Women's College World Series.
Fantastic. After getting knocked out early last year, right?
That's right. So this is a big comeback. They swept Georgia in the NCAA Super Regionals 2 games straight, right here at Easton Stadium. Won the final game 6-1.
Nice. Any standout players?
Definitely pitcher Taylor Tinsley. She gave up a run early in the final game, but then she just shut Georgia down, retired 14 batters in a row at one point, pitched the whole game.
Impressive. And isn't she from Georgia?
She is. A Georgia native. Must have made the win even sweeter for her. This is UCLA's 32nd trip to the World Series, by the way. A national record.
32 times.
Yeah.
That's incredible program consistency. What did the Georgia coach say?
Tony Baldwin. He had high praise for Tinsley and called UCLA a really strong, complete team. Georgia had a tough road just to get there, coming out of the losers bracket.
Who provided the offense for UCLA in that clinching game?
Charlize Palacios was huge, went 3 for 3 with 2 home runs. She's been on fire this postseason, hit 5 homers total so far.
Wow. 2 homers in one game.
Yeah, she said afterwards she was just grateful and really wanted to get to Oklahoma City with her team. You could feel the emotion.
So who do they play first in OKC?
No. 6 UCLA will face 14 Alabama in the first round.
Alabama. Okay. The article mentioned something about recruiting. UCLA usually focuses on California talent.
Yeah. Southern California is obviously a huge pipeline for softball talent. UCLA usually recruits heavily in-state, but Tinsley, being from Georgia, is an exception. Coach Kelly Inouye Perez talked about being inspired by Tinsley's willingness to move across the country for UCLA and her academics. She wants to be a physical therapist.
That's great. And Tinsley is the first player from Georgia to knock out Georgia for UCLA.
Apparently so. Another little piece of history there.
Anyone else step up big in the series?
Oh, yeah. Maya Brady hit 2 home runs in the first game of the series. She's moving up UCLA's all-time lists for hits and homers.
Brady, always a threat. And the pitching in Game 1.
That was Caitlin Terry, the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. She pitched 6 shutout innings in that first game. First UCLA freshman with 20 wins since 2021.
A dominant freshman pitcher. That's huge.
Absolutely. And Jordan Worley hit a big 3-run homer in the final game, too. Seems like they got contributions from up and down the lineup.
Sounds like they're firing on all cylinders heading to OKC.
Definitely. Tinsley was talking after the game about how excited she was to go to the World Series and share it with her parents. Just pure joy.
Awesome. Well, that covers our deep dive into this issue of the Observer Group newspapers. Quite a range.
Yeah, from the really complex details of the state budget and those concerning job numbers for Black women,
to the really inspiring celebration of Malcolm X's legacy, those ongoing healthcare battles in D.C., and, well, a big win for UCLA softball.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how these different stories, they might seem separate, but they often connect.
How so?
Well, budget decisions made in Sacramento directly impact healthcare access, social programs, things that affect employment opportunities. Remembering historical figures like Malcolm X gives context to today's fights for equity, which links back to things like job disparities or even access to healthcare.
Right. And the political arguments in Washington over healthcare funding have real-world consequences here in California, potentially affecting that state budget we started with. Even sports success can reflect community pride and opportunity.
Exactly. It all weaves together.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What are the long-term impacts of these budget choices California's making right now? Are we just kicking the can down the road on some issues?
Or, what are the deeper systemic reasons behind those job numbers for Black women? It's clearly more than just 1 month's data. And how does Malcolm X's message about human rights still challenge us today?
Lots to chew on. These stories definitely raise more questions.
And that's the idea, right? Hopefully this dive gives you some key insights, but also encourages you to keep exploring these topics, see how they connect to your own life, your own community.
Absolutely. Keep digging deeper. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.